How your pain can become your most powerful strength. The science of growth through pain. What if the pain you are desperately trying to escape is not your greatest enemy, but the very key to unlocking your hidden strength? We live in a culture that teaches us to numb pain, to medicate it, to avoid it at all costs. Yet every time you push pain away, you may also be pushing away the exact opportunity your brain and soul need in order to transform. Neuroscience shows us that pain is not only suffering, it is information. It is the body's alarm that growth is available, that change is possible, that a deeper layer of strength is waiting to be awakened. Think of the moments in life that cut you open, the heartbreak that shattered your certainty, the rejection that made you question your worth, the failure that humiliated you, the loss that seemed impossible to endure. In those moments you felt stripped bare, fragile, even broken. But hidden inside those experiences was something extraordinary. Andrew Huberman explains that stress and discomfort activate neuroplasticity, the very process by which your brain rewires itself, builds new circuits, and adapts to challenges. In other words, the moments that hurt the most are also the moments with the greatest potential to reshape your mind. This is not just biology, it is philosophy written in our history. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that hardship was not punishment, but instruction. Seneca taught that adversity reveals the strength that comfort hides. Descartes insisted that pain has a kind of clarity. It forces us to confront what we would rather ignore. Pain exposes illusions, breaks false identities, and compels us to face reality as it is. And in that exposure lies the seed of transformation. But here is the paradox. Pain by itself does not make you stronger. Pain without meaning can destroy you, trap you in bitterness, or leave scars that never heal. The difference lies in how you confront it. Cognitive behavioral therapy shows us that reframing painful experiences changes not only how we feel about them, but also how the brain encodes them. Pain interpreted as punishment creates despair. Pain reframed as feedback creates resilience. This video will not tell you to glorify pain or to chase suffering blindly. Instead, it will reveal the hidden science and timeless wisdom that show you how to harness it. You will see how pain reshapes the brain, how it dismantles fragile identities, how it hijacks your imagination, and how, if you learn to master it, it becomes a force that forges clarity, resilience, and power. By the end, you will no longer see your struggles as chains holding you back, but as the fire forging the person you were meant to become. Pain as the brain's signal of transformation. Pain is often misunderstood as nothing more than a punishment, a cruel interruption of life's flow. But neuroscience shows us something far more profound. Pain is not simply suffering. It is feedback. It is the brain and body sounding an alarm that change is required, that adaptation is possible, that something within you is being called to evolve. Instead of seeing pain as an enemy, imagine it as a signal flare in the dark, pointing directly toward the areas where growth waits to happen. Andrew Huberman explains that discomfort and stress are the very triggers that unlock neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to rewire itself. When life is easy and predictable, the brain has no reason to change. But when challenge strikes, when you are pushed into the unfamiliar, your nervous system becomes alert, flexible, ready to adapt. Pain is the spark that activates this shift, forcing your biology into a state where new circuits can be built and new strengths discovered. This is why people often describe painful chapters as the turning points of their lives. The loss, the rejection, the failure, at the time, each felt unbearable. Yet years later, they look back and realize those moments redefined them. Philosophers sensed this truth long before modern science confirmed it. René Descartes saw pain as clarity, stripping away illusions that comfort allows us to keep. Marcus Aurelius wrote that obstacles become the way itself, because they demand transformation. Pain, in this light, is not a wall. It is a doorway. But here's the challenge. Most people treat pain as a dead end. They numb it, suppress it, or run from it, never allowing the brain's adaptive mechanisms to do their work. When you avoid pain, you also avoid the rewiring it is trying to initiate. You shut down the very signal meant to lead you forward. The key is not to seek pain for its own sake, but to recognize it as the compass of transformation. Every painful experience carries within it two possible outcomes: retreat into avoidance or advancement into growth. And the difference between the two is determined by your willingness to interpret pain not as punishment, but as a call to evolve. Emotional pain and identity reconstruction. Physical pain wounds the body, but emotional pain strikes at the core of who you believe yourself to be. A broken relationship, betrayal, humiliation, or the collapse of a dream doesn't just hurt. It dismantles the image you've built of yourself. And in that collapse lies both the greatest danger and the greatest opportunity. Emotional pain tears down the fragile structures of identity, forcing you to confront what is false, outdated, or unsustainable. It feels like chaos because it is chaos, the death of an old self and the uncertain birth of a new one. Jordan Peterson often speaks of this process as the encounter with chaos that precedes order. When life destabilizes you, when the ground of certainty crumbles, the pieces of your identity scatter. You suddenly realize that the person you thought you were is no longer adequate for the demands of reality. This recognition is terrifying, but it is also liberating. Only in that brokenness can you rebuild on foundations strong enough to endure. Cognitive behavioral therapy demonstrates how this reconstruction takes place. The story you tell yourself about pain determines whether it imprisons or transforms you. If you interpret suffering as evidence that you are worthless, you reinforce despair. But if you reinterpret it as proof that your old patterns no longer serve you, then pain becomes a catalyst for growth. The brain, through neuroplasticity, encodes this new meaning into its circuits. Each reframing is like laying down a stronger foundation for a renewed self. Philosophers knew this centuries ago. Michel de Montaigne reflected that we are never truly ourselves until we are tested, until life forces us to shed illusions and face our naked humanity. Seneca reminded us that adversity doesn't change us, it reveals us. Emotional pain unmasks the ego's pretenses, leaving behind a more authentic self. This is the hidden gift of pain. It dismantles false identities so that truth can emerge. It destroys the masks you wear to protect yourself, exposing both your fragility and your strength. And though this exposure feels unbearable, it is also the birthplace of resilience. Every scar carved into your soul becomes a mark of the person you are becoming, a self not defined by comfort, but forged by struggle. Neurochemistry of pain and growth. Behind every painful experience, there is not only emotion, but also chemistry. Your brain and body are wired to respond to suffering in ways that, paradoxically, prepare you for resilience. Dopamine, endorphins, and serotonin, the very neurotransmitters that govern motivation, relief, and mood, play a crucial role in how pain can be transformed into strength. Understanding this chemistry reveals why those who endure hardship often develop a depth of focus and clarity that comfort alone could never produce. Andrew Huberman explains that dopamine is not simply the molecule of pleasure, it is the molecule of pursuit. When you endure pain in the service of a greater purpose, whether in exercise, fasting, discipline, or personal struggle, your brain links discomfort to progress. It begins to release dopamine not when you avoid pain, but when you push through it. This rewires your nervous system, teaching it that growth is rewarding even when it hurts. Endorphins, on the other hand, are released as natural painkillers, creating a sense of relief and sometimes even euphoria after intense challenge. They remind you that pain has a cycle, that suffering is followed by recovery, and that endurance carries its own reward. Joe Dispenza highlights another layer. When we engage with pain consciously, the stress of the experience can shift mental states. It forces the body into heightened awareness, breaking the automated patterns of thought and behavior that keep us stuck. In this vulnerable state, new choices can be made and new neural connections formed. Pain disrupts the autopilot, opening a doorway to conscious change. Philosophers intuited this truth long before science measured it. Aristotle believed virtue was forged through repeated exposure to discomfort until the body and mind became aligned with strength. Seneca argued that pain was not to be feared, but trained with, as one trains with weights to grow stronger. Their wisdom anticipated what modern neuroscience now proves. Pain activates the very systems that allow us to adapt, focus, and become resilient. The key is this: pain itself does not transform you. It is your engagement with it, your choice to interpret it as a signal for growth, that activates these biological and psychological mechanisms. Pain resisted leaves scars. Pain harnessed leaves strength. Pain as a mirror of hidden strengths. Pain has a way of revealing aspects of yourself you would never discover in comfort. When everything is easy, you operate on the surface, predictable routines, shallow emotions, safe choices. But when life strikes with difficulty, pain forces you to dig deeper. It exposes weaknesses, yes, but in doing so, it also uncovers strengths you didn't know existed. What feels like breaking is often the first glimpse of your hidden resilience. Seneca believed that hardship is not the enemy of character, but its true test. Fire tests gold, adversity tests the brave, he wrote. Pain strips away the illusion of fragility by showing you that you can survive what you once thought impossible. Every moment of endurance adds evidence to your identity. You are stronger than you believed, more capable than you imagined. This is why so many people, when reflecting on their lives, point to their hardest seasons as the ones that defined them most. Modern science confirms this ancient wisdom. Psychologists call it stress inoculation, the principle that repeated exposure to manageable discomfort builds resilience. Each time you withstand pain without collapsing, your nervous system learns that survival is possible, and your threshold for future challenges expands. The body adapts, the brain rewires, and what once felt unbearable begins to feel manageable. This is not only physiological, it is existential. Pain trains you to recognize your own depth. Andrew Huberman emphasizes that resilience is not built in moments of comfort, but in the moments when systems are pushed to their edge. Endurance training, cold exposure, disciplined study, all these practices harness controlled pain to strengthen the mind. But life itself often provides the most difficult training. Emotional wounds, losses, betrayals. These are not chosen, yet they demand the same resilience. In their wake, you discover reserves of strength you never had to call upon before. Pain becomes a mirror, not of who you were, but of who you could become. It reflects both your breaking points and your hidden capacities. To embrace this truth is to stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What strength is this revealing in me?" The imagination trap of pain. Much of the suffering we experience does not come from pain itself, but from the way our imagination magnifies it. The mind has the power to replay wounds long after they have healed, to anticipate suffering before it arrives, and to create entire scenarios that may never happen. Emotional pain, when rehearsed silently, grows larger than life. You don't just feel the moment once. You relive it 1,000 times, each repetition carving it deeper into your nervous system. Andrew Huberman explains that the brain does not perfectly distinguish between imagination and reality. When you repeatedly visualize failure, rejection, or loss, your nervous system responds as if those events are happening in real time. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, stress hormones surge. By rehearsing pain internally, you are training your brain and body to expect it. What began as a single wound becomes a chronic state of fear, built not from reality, but from imagination. The Stoics understood this long before neuroscience. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and Montaigne observed that silent fears often grow monstrous when left unexamined. This is the imagination trap. Pain, amplified by thought, until it exceeds the original wound. Cognitive behavioral therapy uses this knowledge to break the cycle. When you externalize your fears by writing them down, speaking them aloud, or reframing them, you strip them of their exaggerated power. What once felt overwhelming often reveals itself as survivable, even small, when exposed to the light of reason. The danger of the imagination trap is that it convinces you to avoid life, not because of pain itself, but because of the shadows you've projected onto it. The way out is not to silence imagination, but to redirect it. The same mind that rehearses suffering can rehearse resilience, envisioning action and strength until those patterns become the new default. Pain is real, but much of your suffering may not be. Recognizing this is the first step to breaking free from the illusions that self-doubt and fear create. Turning pain into discipline. Pain, when left unmanaged, can consume you, but when harnessed, it becomes the foundation of discipline. Every discomfort, every trial, every moment of resistance is an invitation to practice control over your impulses and to channel suffering into structure. Aristotle believed that virtue was not an abstract ideal, but a habit formed through repeated action, often forged in the fire of discomfort. To master pain is to train the will, and to train the will is to build the character that no external force can easily break. Think of the way an athlete builds strength. Muscles do not grow in comfort. They grow under the strain of weight, through the micro-tears that cause soreness, and in the disciplined repetition of pushing past fatigue. The same principle applies to the mind. Each time you face pain and refuse to retreat, you are strengthening the mental muscles of resilience, patience, and focus. Discipline is not born in the absence of struggle. It is born in the decision to continue in spite of it. Modern neuroscience affirms this truth. Huberman's research shows that deliberate exposure to controlled discomfort, cold immersion, fasting, endurance training, reshapes how the nervous system interprets stress. The brain begins to associate discomfort not with danger, but with adaptation. Dopamine pathways rewire to reward persistence, teaching you to find meaning and even satisfaction in the very moments that once felt unbearable. But discipline through pain is not limited to physical practices. Life itself offers constant opportunities, staying present in grief instead of numbing it, choosing to work toward a long-term goal when immediate pleasure tempts you, maintaining integrity under pressure when compromise would be easier. Each choice builds a pattern, and patterns accumulate into character. Seneca wrote that difficulty strengthens the mind as labor strengthens the body. When you ritualize your response to pain, turning it into daily practices of patience, focus, and resilience, you no longer see pain as an interruption of life. You see it as life's most consistent teacher. And the lessons it gives you are not abstract. They are discipline, structure, and the ability to stand unshaken in a world that will always test you. Pain and meaning. Pain without meaning is destructive. It corrodes hope, fuels despair, and leaves you feeling like a victim of circumstances beyond your control. But pain infused with meaning transforms into power. The same experience that once threatened to break you becomes the very force that elevates you. Viktor Frankl, who endured the horrors of concentration camps, wrote that those who could assign meaning to their suffering were the ones who endured. Pain itself is not what destroys. It is the absence of purpose in that pain. Jordan Peterson echoes this truth when he explains that life is suffering by nature, but what redeems that suffering is responsibility. When you connect pain to a higher goal, to protecting your family, to building your future, to becoming a stronger version of yourself, the suffering doesn't vanish, but it becomes bearable. Your nervous system interprets it differently. Andrew Huberman notes that when the brain frames pain as progress, dopamine is released even in moments of hardship, reinforcing resilience instead of despair. This is why two people can face similar tragedies with entirely different outcomes. One collapses, feeling cursed, while the other rises, seeing their trial as the crucible that shapes their destiny. Meaning doesn't erase the wound, but it changes its role in your life story. The scar becomes a reminder of survival, not of defeat. Philosophy has always understood this bridge. Marcus Aurelius saw pain as part of the natural order, not a punishment, but an element of existence to be integrated. Aristotle believed that virtue was proven not in comfort, but in adversity, where meaning is tested and forged. Michel de Montaigne reflected that a man learns more about himself in suffering than in joy, because pain strips away the unnecessary and reveals the essence. Pain is unavoidable, but despair is not. The difference lies in the lens through which you interpret it. If you can assign your suffering a purpose, however small, you transform it from a weight to a weapon, from a burden to a teacher. Meaning is the alchemy that turns pain into strength, and it is within your power to choose it. How to convert pain into strength? Pain on its own is raw energy. To turn it into strength, you need a process, a framework that prevents it from consuming you and instead channels it into growth. The science of psychology and the wisdom of philosophy converge on three essential steps: label, reframe, and ritualize. The first step is to label. This means acknowledging pain directly instead of avoiding or suppressing it. Cognitive behavioral therapy emphasizes that when you name an emotion, grief, anger, fear, you immediately reduce its unconscious power. The brain shifts activity from the emotional centers into the prefrontal cortex, allowing clarity and regulation to take over. By labeling pain, you transform it from an overwhelming force into a defined signal you can work with. The second step is to reframe. Reframing does not deny the pain, but gives it new meaning. Neuroscience shows that the interpretation you attach to an event changes how your brain stores it. A setback seen as proof of inadequacy strengthens patterns of despair, but the same event reframed as a lesson builds resilience. Jordan Peterson calls this confronting chaos with structure, turning suffering into a story of responsibility rather than victimhood. The Stoics practice this daily, reminding themselves that adversity is not what happens to you, but how you choose to meet it. The third step is to ritualize. Pain becomes transformative when you create practices that embody the lesson. That might mean building habits of discipline like exercise, fasting, or study, or choosing daily acts of courage in conversations, projects, and relationships. Andrew Huberman's research shows that repeated exposure to controlled discomfort rewires dopamine pathways to reward endurance. The more consistently you ritualize resilience, the more your nervous system learns to interpret hardship as progress. When you label, you break the silence of pain. When you reframe, you change its meaning. When you ritualize, you transform it into strength. This is the process that turns wounds into wisdom, suffering into resilience, and adversity into the foundation of a powerful life. Transformational bridge. Now you see what pain truly is. Not a punishment, not a curse, but a force carrying the potential to transform you if you dare to confront it. Every struggle you have faced, every wound that still aches, every scar you carry is proof that you have already endured more than your mind once believed possible. Pain is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your strength. Before today, you may have looked at suffering as something meaningless, something to escape or numb. But now you know that pain is the brain's alarm for adaptation, the dismantling of false identities, the mirror of hidden strengths, and the doorway to discipline and meaning. You understand that its chemistry can rewire your nervous system, that its chaos can reconstruct your life, and that its presence is not evidence of weakness, but of potential. Philosophers and scientists across centuries agree on this truth. What stands in your way becomes the way. Seneca saw it, Aristotle defined it, Marcus Aurelius lived it, and modern neuroscience confirms it. Pain is not here to destroy you, it is here to evolve you. The choice is no longer whether you will feel pain, because you will. The choice is whether you will allow it to shrink you or to forge you into someone greater. So when the next wave of suffering comes, and it will, remember that inside it lies a signal, a lesson, a hidden strength waiting to be born. You cannot control when pain arrives, but you can control what it becomes. And in that decision lies the difference between a life of retreat and a life of resilience. Before today, you may have avoided pain. After today, you will see it as the fire that forges clarity, focus, and resilience. The question is no longer why me, but what strength is this calling me to awaken?